So we basically have nothing because we don't have lights, we don't have a floor to bounce on, etc. Well, let's put in a floor. Boom. I'm not going to do anything to the floor. By the way, this dashed line is your horizon, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to do a quick render of a rolling tire. All right. Now, the lights have actually tackled so many times in previous tutorials. I'm just gonna fly through it. First of all, it's sort of like an outdoorsy situation, so the quick and dirty way to do it is to start off with an infinite light. Infinite lights are a wall of light, like the sun. So I'm just gonna roll it around and aim it something like this. Looks good. Now, usually you don't want to have multiple shadows, so I'm just going to turn on hard shadows for this particular light. Setting the shadows, hard shadows, is fine, but you get black shadows. So put the density down, people. This is for a standard quick render, no thrills. All right. Well, maybe I should aim it a little bit more onto this side, and I'll put in some backlight. It's also an infinite light, maybe a little bit less, and I'm going to the project tab, and I'm gonna put in the floor so the floor doesn't get lit by this light. And I'm just going to name it back so that I know what it is. And maybe give it a little bit of color, you know. Yeah, it's orangey. It's fine. Something like this. And I don't really have to tone down the intensity, but I'm still going to. Because it's already colored light, it's not 100% white. So what I got is this. Now, what you can see here is really crappy anti-aliasing around the edges of the shadows. Don't want to see that. Get to that in a second. What else are we going to do? I'm going to introduce a point light, sort of like an ambient light, but it's definitely coming from a certain direction. And I'm just going to tone it down and maybe make it a little bit yellow like this, and well, it gives me a little bit of warmth to my tire. Oh, by the way, I did say don't use multiple lights with shadows, but with this backlight I don't want to have it on the inside of the tire if it casts a shadow, so I'm just going to say yes, ray traced shadows. And that only encompasses the tire itself and not so much the background. Now let's see. Let's set up the render settings. I'm going into my render settings right here with the cogwheel, and let's see now. I have to set a whole bunch of things that I usually do by default, but I'm going to make this an MP4, and I can choose the path and the file name here, and I'm going to go to the output, and here, if you haven't changed that already or have it as a default, 25 frames per second, because it has to match the project settings. Now we're going to render 76 frames, frame 0 to 75, that's 76 frames, and this one is important. Anti-aliasing. Now, it says here geometry. Just do best. You always want to have best. And I'm asking for a filter, Mitchell. I'm not going to go into the details, but that one works for me. Options, I can discuss these, but they're a little bit on the high side. It doesn't really matter. If you got that set up, you can just push render and it will render your animation. Didn't I show that 2 tutorials ago? Well, I guess so. But it will look nice and rendered. And I haven't added anything like motion blur, which will work better on the tire since the bounce is really short. It's less than a frame sometimes, so that would work for the tire. Well, maybe I can add that here. If you want to have something like motion blur, I'll just attach it to the tire. Where is it nowadays? Oh God, render, motion blur, there it is. So you add a motion blur tag, and this is rather high, but I'm just leaving it like that. And the only thing you have to remember is that you adding an effect, and it's called, where is it? Subframe motion blur or vector motion blur. I usually use vector, but you have to add one of the two, of course, and here you can just play around with the settings. It obviously is going to take some test renders to get the most out of your render, and you never know with these numbers what they're exactly going to do. Usually it's toning things down instead of pumping things up. And that's it. That's the whole shebang. So you got a bouncy tire that actually looks good and you can render.